Hello, YouTubers out there. This is Jerry at the Movies with your host, Jerry Saravia. So today I'm doing two brief reviews. First up, I finally saw 1990's Night of the Living Dead, which is the first remake of George Romero's horror classic Night of the Living Dead from 1968. Um, let's put this very clearly and bluntly. It's essentially, almost to some degree, a scene-by-scene remake of the original. Um, it's definitely not better than the original, but it did catch me by surprise. I kind of enjoyed it. Tony Todd is the certainly one of the main characters, and Patricia, an actress named Patricia Tallman, who I'm hoping actually to get an interview with, hopefully by tomorrow, Monday, we'll see. She also appears in it. Anyway, they're kind of doing a couple of the same roles that were done in the original film. Dwayne Jones, his role is played by Tony Todd, which is an excellent replacement. Tony Todd is a fantastic actor. And I don't know, look, I can't really say too much. It is almost the same movie. It's in color. One of the big differences is the opening famous scene from the original film, which was the graveyard. They're coming to get you, Barbara, and all this stuff. And they see this person, which is essentially a ghoul. I guess that's the way that the dead, the undead, that's the way Romero wants it to be remembered, not necessarily as a zombie, approaches them and all this. And turns out to be not just some drunk hanging around a graveyard, but an actual ghoul, yeah, the undead. In this film, the two of them, Patricia Tallman, once again plays Barbara, by the way, and Bill Moseley plays the brother. And a guy does approach them, and he says, "You got to get out of here," or something of that nature. And then suddenly a ghoul comes out of nowhere. Some critics seem to object to that scene by changing it a little, but I liked how that was done. It follows the same pattern. She goes to a house. The brother's killed, having his head slammed on a tombstone uh, by the zombie. We'll just say zombie for now. And she, approaches the house, and the truck shows up, and it's Tony Todd to the rescue. Keeps her in the house, and of course there are people in the basement, and so on. So it follows kind of the same pattern as the original film. A little less of that implied, if you like, racial tension from the first picture. This one was directed by Tom Savini, who was the makeup expert who did the makeup effects in Dawn of the Dead, and of course you might know him from Dusk Till Dawn and a bunch of other things. Anyway, I think he also appeared in Dawn of the Dead remake briefly, and he did a competent job. I think Ebert said there were too many scenes of them hammering, all these tables and wood against the windows so that the zombies can't get through. Well, there was some of that in the original too. I mean, it's really not that far off. There aren't as many scares. There's an interesting ending. I gotta tell you, that's the ending kind of is not exactly the same as the original. And it's more in keeping with, let's say, how George Romero views things on a sociological level. I'll just leave it at that. Definitely check it out. It's worth seeing. I don't recommend Night of the Living Dead in 3D, which is a version that came out in 2006. I saw the first few minutes of it, and I am the kind of person that likes to sit through an entire movie, no matter how awful it is. I could not watch this movie. I don't know what they did. Maybe someday I'll consider looking at the end of it. I don't know. Sid Haig is in it, but not enough reason for me to check it out. I'm also, if I understood this correctly, they're taking a couple of the actors that were in the 1990 version of Night of the Living Dead, Tony Todd and so on, and yet another remake. And I think it's called Origins, but somebody can, tell me for sure out there what this is all about, because I don't know. I don't know how many remakes you need in Night of the Living Dead. I understand why they did the 1990 version. It was a financial reason because they didn't make the money that they did with the original film. Um, you know, it was George Romero's first film, and of course, it became a much bigger success than he even thought it would have been. So anyway, check out the 1990 version. Don't bother with the 2006 and 3D version unless somebody can, with great enthusiasm, tell me it's worth sitting through an hour and a half of. So I enjoyed it. Not a bad remake. Maybe not a necessary one, but an interesting one. And a fascinating ending, I thought. So, now we skip to another movie, which I have heard of, but I never had the pleasure of sitting through it. And this was actually a tape that my wife had, because she's a huge Fleshtones fan, as am I. I enjoy the Fleshtones, a great garage band. If not the greatest, I saw them twice. Anyway, they did a title tune called I Was a Teenage Zombie, which is the title of a 1987 flick. And this was a midnight movie for a little while. It's not a decent zombie 1980s spoof. It's hardly the worst of its kind. Anyway, there's some high school kids who spend very little time in school. They try to buy weed from one drug dealer. It doesn't work out. They confront another drug dealer named Mussolini, played by Steve McCoy, and which, according to IMDb, is the only film he ever did. They buy weed from him, but it's not good weed, which is really bad. And Mussolini is whacked in the head with a baseball bat by one of these ragtag group of teenagers, and they throw him into the river. And the river, unfortunately, is contaminated with radiation. And this is all set in New York City. So what do they do to fight this Mussolini, who turns into a green-skinned zombie emerging from this river? One of the teenagers is killed by Mussolini. So when they go to the funeral service, they whisk the body away, literally, and throw him into the river, thinking if he turns into a zombie, he can fight Mussolini. I mean, it's a spoof. It's silly, it's stupid, it's really bad movie. But it's what it's lacking is what 1985's film Return of the Living Dead had, which was, it was spooky, funny, a bit of a spoof, but also somewhat scary. Return of the Living Dead really is an amazing picture by the late director Dan O'Bannon, who worked with John Carpenter on one of John Carpenter's first films, Dark Star. Anyhow, definitely check out Return of the Living Dead. I Was a Teenage Zombie is not worth your time at all. It does have a nice, sweet little love story, but other than that, for gore fans out there who are really into this sort of thing, a sexed up girl is split apart during sex, and there's a decapitation of another character who I don't want to reveal, which involves splitting also the brain in half. It's that type of movie. There's one good line about atheism. I thought it was a very inspired line of dialogue. But basically, the actors look like stuck teen stereotypes. And the best performance is by Steve McCoy, who goes over the top in this sort of spoof. So it's basically a trauma-like production with trauma values, production values rather, and maybe trauma values too, but not worth your time. So anyway, the film's director, by the way, is John Elias Michaelakis, and this was the only film he ever directed. He did actually work for Troma prior to that on a set of The Toxic Avenger. And he disappeared from the film business and became a monk. So if he ever came back again, you could do I Was a Monk Zombie, which probably might be a lot better than I Was a Teenage Zombie. So I don't recommend seeing I Was a Teenage Zombie, but definitely listen to the title tune, if nothing else, by the Fleshtones. The Fleshtones do rock, by the way. I've seen them in concert. That's it. But check out Night of the Living Dead, for sure. And in a future episode, which will probably be fairly soon, I want to discuss the two Blob films. The Blob from 1958, starring Steve McQueen, and the remake by Chuck Russell, who did one of the best Elm Street sequels, Part 3, The Dream Warriors. So stay tuned for that future episode. Maybe on Halloween, who knows. I'm kind of glad also Rob Zombie didn't do a Blob remake. He was offered, I guess, the chance to do it, and either turned it down or the project derailed. That's fine. We don't need too many more Blob movies. Anyway, that's it. And this is Jerry the Movies with your host, Jerry Saravia, signing off.